Before we get to Julie, I just want to share a little bit about the Art and Culture Center. For those who have not been to our location, we are at 1650 Harrison Street, just one block east of Young Circle in downtown Hollywood. We present about a dozen originally curated contemporary gallery exhibitions each year and about 9 arts education programs for children and young adults. We also manage a 500-seat theater located at US 1 and Monroe Street. Among the 3 exhibitions currently in our gallery is Open Dialogue, Stories from the LGBTQ Community, which features a 20-minute documentary film that was produced by the center. The exhibition includes artifacts from the Stonewall Museum and Archives and 3 poems by Julie Wade that are framed in the gallery. The Open Dialogues film captures the coming out narratives of 7 Broward County residents, including Julie's. A trailer for the film can be viewed at artandculturecenter.org, and we will share that a little bit later, and hope you can go to our site and see a trailer of the film. The film and this reading are funded by the Community Foundation of Broward as part of its Broward Pride grant initiative. And now for Julie. Born in Seattle in 1979, Julie Marie Wade completed a Master's of Arts in English at Western Washington University, a Master of Fine Arts in Poetry at the University of Pittsburgh, and a PhD in Interdisciplinary Humanities at the University of Louisville. She has published 12 collections of poetry, prose, and hybrid forms, most recently the memoir, Just an Ordinary Woman Breathing, and a collection of collaborative essays, The Unrhymables, co-authored with Denise Duhamel. A winner of the Marie Alexander Poetry Series and the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Memoir, Julie teaches in the Creative Writing Program at Florida International University. She makes her home with Angie Griffin and their 2 cats in Dania Beach. And just one note before we bring Julie on, your mics have been disabled, but we do welcome comments and questions in the Zoom chat icon at the bottom of your screen. And now I'd like to welcome Julie Marie Wade.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you also, Yvette, who you can't see, but she's handling the tech and making everything run smoothly tonight. And I'm just so happy because I didn't know I would even be able to see your little name boxes at all. So, so this is sometimes more than we get to see when we're doing these presentations. So thank you for being here. As Jeff mentioned, this event is connected. Originally, it was going to take place much closer to the release of Open Dialogues, but the benefit of having had to delay is that we're now able to have the event in October, which is LGBTQ History Month. And I thought that that was a good occasion to kind of structure this reading of poetry and prose around the subject of coming out. The documentary does indeed talk about coming out, and the participants speak about their early coming out experiences. But as all of us who have come out know, part of coming out is that you're always coming out, right? It's not just National Coming Out Day on October 11th. Maybe that's your remembrance day of the first time you came out, but it's this process that we're going through throughout the course of our lives, every time we move, every time we meet new people. And for me, coming out has been something that has always been complex. It's something I've been doing for almost 20 years, and it's something that I've always struggled with because there are 2 competing feelings that I've had about coming out since the very beginning. One is that who wouldn't want to make an authentic statement, declaration about who you are, and in many cases, who you love. I mean, that's fantastic, right? What's more empowering than that? But my initial resistance when I was in my early 20s and coming out for the first time was always, why do my straight friends not have to do this? I guess another way of looking at it is, why don't they get to do this? But there wasn't that sense of a balance in our experience. And fortunately, when I was first coming out, I was also just starting graduate school, and I got to take a lot of classes and later do a certificate in graduate school in queer studies, and to look and find that there were people who were studying my experience, who were studying the experiences of other queer people in terms of our shared experience of needing to come out and why we had to do that when others didn't. And the term that really helped me, even though it's not a term that you'll find in any of my poetry or other creative writing, helped me understand what was going on, is the term presumed heterosexuality. You can see why it doesn't lend itself really easily to a poem, but it helped me understand that there were people who were aware of that thing that I was struggling with. And it was the fact that by virtue of already being presumed to be something, that was why I had to come out in the first place. And so when all of the cultural scripts and family scripts and church scripts were all set up to say, everyone is straight, no exceptions, and also by extension, everyone is cisgender, no exceptions, then even if the people that you meet later on are accepting of coming out and who you are when you do come out, there's that feeling of like having to start a conversation with people that starts in a contradiction or starts in a correction. And that's not the way I ever want to start a conversation. If you're trying to have common ground with people, it feels on some level to me, I've always struggled with that idea of actually, no, I'm not straight. Actually, I'm gay, or I don't have a husband. My spouse is a woman. Like having to begin with that kind of correction is more like moving into an argumentative space than I would ever want or ever choose. And so as empowering as coming out is, it was feeling like I had to do it and that I still have to do it as something that corrects something that I wish wasn't there to begin with, that presumption that has fueled a lot of my writing. And when I wrote this book, When I Was Straight, it was published in 2014, I had the idea, instead of saying this is a book about presumed heterosexuality and what it's like to grow up when there just are no other doors open to you, this is the only thing you've been told you're allowed to be, which is straight, then how does that look if you look at it poetically, if you're not coming at it with the language of a theorist, but coming at it with the language of a poet? So the first 5 poems that I'm going to read they're very short poems. All of the poems at the beginning of this book are titled When I Was Straight. And so I will read the sequence of 5 poems for you now. When I was straight, I did not love men as I do now. I loved them wincing and wanting to please. I loved them trying too hard. The world was an arrow pulled taut, pointing toward an altar. I was blushing and bashful, but never a bride. There were little things too. I had hosiery, a silky camisole, a nice pair of heels, but I'd have to slip them off if the man was shorter than I, slouch against walls, one knee always bent like a penitent at communion. I may have smiled more than the part of my lips so often mistaken for happiness. In fact, it was something else, a fissure, a break in the line, the way a paragraph will sometimes falter until you recognize its promise as a poem. When I was straight, I did not love women as I do now. I loved them with my eyes closed, my back turned. I loved them silent and startled and shy. The world was a dreamless slumber party, sleeping bags like straitjackets spread out on the living room floor, my face pressed into a slender pillow. All night I woke to rain on the strangers' windows. No one remembered to leave a light on in the hall. Someone's father seemed always to be shaving. When I stood up, I tried to tiptoe around the sleeping bodies, their long hair speckled with confetti, their faces blanched by the porchlight moon. I never knew exactly where the bathroom was. I tried to wake the host girl to ask her, but she was only one adrift in that sea of bodies. I was ashamed to say they all looked the same to me, beautiful and untouchable as stars. It would be years before I learned to find anyone in the sumptuous, terrifying dark. When I was straight, there was a man in the moon and a man at the head of the table. There was a woman with a dish rag draped across her narrow shoulder. Sometimes they were on television and the laugh track softened their features, made me long for them like a summer's cool rain. In that first world, the man always drove and the woman always read a magazine, Good Housekeeping or Better Homes and Gardens. The woman did not know how to work the lawnmower and the man did not know how to work the microwave. They were hesitant and grateful in the presence of each other's bodies. When I see them now, I am too old to be mistaken for their daughter. The women no longer smile, pat my hand, promise the right man is soon to come along. The men do not whistle or nod. Even the sky grows distant. The new moon turns charcoal against gray. It's getting dark out, the couples say, and draw the doors closed, leading to the master bedroom. When I was straight, it was like a game of Red Rover, and someone was always being sent over, flung out into the field of unbelonging and struggling to break back in. The team that called you didn't want you, and the team that had you couldn't keep you. No one was content to run or stay put. So was it any surprise that when they shouted, Red Rover, send Julie right over, my feelings were mixed. Relief split hairs with regret. Pumping my legs as hard as I could, I broke clean through their tightly knit line. The trouble was I never stopped running. I never turned back and joined hands. When I was straight, I could tell my mother how I wanted her to brush my hair and braid it through with ribbons. I could tell my father how I loved baking cookies and pinning damp clothes on the line, that I liked folding napkins and saying grace and dressing my dolls for dinner. But I could not tell them I was also the kind of girl who walked up slides in muddy sneakers, who threw stones at the slats of neighbors' fences and spit through the lattice when she thought no one was looking. That when I saw a no trespassing sign, I thought of it more as an invitation. In other words, I learned early on about the double life, how you could smile brightly into someone's face, saying yes when you meant no, true when you meant false, your sticky fingers crossed behind your back. And of those poems, I think it's that last one that maybe best captures for me what presumed heterosexuality feels like or felt like in my own experience of having to say things one way to please the powers that be, but not always even agreeing with yourself as you were saying them. So to turn to the prose side of things, I'm going to read for about 7 minutes from the new memoir that Jeff mentioned called Just an Ordinary Woman Breathing. This is a glimpse of what it looks like. And I'm going to read from moment in this book. It's an extended scene when I'm about 11 years old, and I grew up in Seattle, and every summer I was sent to a day camp, so where your parents pick you up at the end of the day, right? And the camp was actually called Camp Long, which is also funny because many of those days felt very, very long. But the passage I'm going to read is about the time when I'm coming back to camp after the previous summer having a crush on one of the female counselors. And of course, in my mind, I couldn't quite make sense that that was possible because I had never been told that a girl could have a crush on another girl. So I just had this sense of unease about it, but also this fascination with this counselor. And it was notable to me then, as you'll see, but even more notable to me now in light of all of the thinking that I've been doing about coming out and naming ourselves and presumed heterosexuality and such, that all of the counselors at this camp got to choose an animal name for themselves. And so we didn't know what their real names were, but we were not allowed to choose a name for ourselves as the campers. So we just had to be called by our given names. And I remember feeling that this was so unjust and petitioning and saying like, but shouldn't we be able to choose a name for ourselves as well? But this didn't work out. And so I think there's something in that too about the agency of being able to name yourself versus not being able to name yourself that really bothered me then and bothers me now. So I'm going to read this passage. I think you know everything you need to know. The next year, a new girl returns to camp in the guise of my body. She is taller than everyone now, as tall as her own mother, who commends her height and has been known to exclaim, "We're hoping for Nicole Kidman here, or Gwyneth Paltrow." These are not names the girl recognizes, though she suspects they are movie stars. Whoever they are, she trusts they are tall and blonde. Though I am longing to see Spider, I have already loved someone in the interim, someone I was not supposed to love, my 4th grade teacher. I have also failed to love someone I was expected to love, my first boyfriend. I wear Lee's friendship bracelet around my wrist, practice thinking of him when I fall asleep at night. But soon my mind drifts back to Mrs. Miller, ascending the staircase in her spacious house, which always resembles Barbie's dream house, no matter how hard I try to make it otherwise. She is clad in a lavender nightgown that trails behind her, with slippers and a robe to match. When she opens the door to her bedroom, Mr. Miller is there, propped on the soft white pillows, reading the newspaper in his undershirt, his neckline rimmed with coarse black hairs. I squint to squeeze him out of the picture, but he always returns, resilient as a toothache or a canker sore. He flashes her an eager smile, then reaches over to switch off the light. Now during free time, I linger on the hill, hoping for a chance to talk to Spider. As a cover, I have my notebook with me and even an alibi. I'm pretending to write a field guide for future visitors to Camp Long. Hello, she waves. Can you remind me of your name again? It's Julie, I say, my eyes averted, but my heart climbing up in my throat. That's right. What are you working on? Spider inquires. She tucks her one leg under the other and perches beside me on the grass. I glance at her quickly, like small sips of water. The worst thing is to be caught gulping. I notice that she's wearing a white t-shirt with a V-shaped neck. I notice that a silver charm dangles against her smooth, exposed skin. I notice that her nails are coated with gloss. Oh, just a project, I offer, trying to sound nonchalant. I want to write a detailed guide to the campsite, maybe have it distributed to future visitors. For some reason, when I'm nervous, I lean on my biggest words. They're like crutches, which my father says make your armpits sore if you rely on them too long. What a nice idea, Spider says. Will you draw maps too? Maybe, but I'm more of a wordsmith than a visual artist. Spider sits beside me for a little while, scanning the landscape for campers gone wild or astray. Did you make that bracelet yourself, she asks, and all at once a door, a portal to a new kind of conversation, begins to materialize. Actually, my boyfriend made it for me, I reply. Now Spider regards me in a different light. I can hear the shift in her voice, the note of reverence. Really? You have a boyfriend? That's wonderful. It was bound to happen, I say, now that I'm 11. What's he like? Oh, you know, like a boyfriend. This is a harder question than it sounds, since Lee is mostly just an outline to me, a blurry apparition like the Gnostic Jesus. In some essential but inexpressible way, I didn't believe Lee's body was made of the same earthly substance as mine. Do you have a boyfriend, I ask? And this is easier now, because I have established myself as an experienced woman, a potential confidant. I did, she sighs, but we broke up. I probably shouldn't be wearing this necklace now, but I like it so much I kept it anyway. Spider has granted me license to look, to peer at the piece of silver glinting against her collarbones. It is, of all things, a key. Does it open something? I whisper, the world becoming too loud a place again, threatening to drown out our conversation. No, it's just symbolic. Her eyes are green and dreamy, but now they are moist too, like she might cry. You know, I think he was saying he had the key to my heart. Then why did he give it to you? Shouldn't he have kept it? Spider looks at me now, her eyes growing wide with surprise. I guess I never thought of it that way. Do you want to know a secret? I say. It is more of a lie than a secret, but sometimes the lines between these are blurry too. The truth itself, an apparition. Spider nods. My real name isn't Julie. It isn't? No, my real name is Juliet, like the girl Romeo loved. It's old-fashioned, so I don't use it. I've actually never told anyone before. Where Spider touches my arm, the little white hairs rise up, ecstatic. I promise, she whispers, that I won't tell anyone. Spider looks, oh, thank you, I say. May I ask about your real name? Spider looks over her shoulder, then out at the field, then back again, her dreamy green eyes coming to rest on mine. All right, she concedes, but you can't tell anyone or it'll take all the fun out of the camp names. I smile into her face like a flower drenched in sunlight. I promise, I say. It's Andrea. I've never heard that name before, I murmur, forgetting to let the air pass through to my lungs. It's spelled like Andrea, she says, but pronounced differently. Andrea. This is the most extraordinary name I will ever learn, better than any princess or protagonist. Mum's the word, she tells me, a long finger with a tapered nail pressed gently across her lips. Spider raises herself to standing and pulls a whistle out of her pocket. All right, everybody, gather around. Andrea is the only word I write in my notebook that night. Andrea. It becomes my first mantra, the key to an unseen door. In school, you learn there is a text and a subtext. The teacher says there is always a subject and a theme. The theme runs under the subject like a dark river. You picture it like the Red Sea. Your job as the reader is to part the subject with your staff, to split the waters between what is obvious and what is only implied. In your first essay of 5th grade, you will explain what you learned at Camp Long. For instance, water lilies are not free-floating, as you once believed, but tethered to the base of the pond. This is a subject. The themes beneath it, the themes that only the best and most intrepid readers will recognize, are as follows. Beauty is never unconditional. Nothing is as it appears. The surface and the subterranean often contradict each other. Desire has deep roots that are not easily severed. So I'm going to switch back. This is a poetry sandwich. I'm going to switch back to poetry one more time and kind of pick up on the other side. You've sort of seen a lot of autobiographical childhood-based writing. The other side of the When I Was Straight project, it's kind of like a seesaw, are the after poems. So there are all these before poems before coming out. And then there are an equal number of poems that are also occasion poems, but instead of When I Was Straight, they're when telling someone I'm a lesbian. And these are also very autobiographical, rooted in lived experience. Some of them are funny. I know I won't hear you if you're laughing, but it's okay to laugh. And I often laugh about some of these experiences myself, but also back to that idea, kind of the theme of this reading of feeling like you need to correct an assumption. You don't know then, since the assumption's been made, and you don't know how dear the presumption of heterosexuality is to the person who's made it. You don't always know what's going to happen next when you tell someone, I'm gay. And so these are a few examples of how that has played out in my life. These are mostly from my early 20s. A few are from more recently. When Sharon at work learns I am a lesbian, she replies as if I have asked her a question. My daughter used to want to wear her brother's Spider-Man underwear. I got her to a therapist who said it was nothing to worry about. She just loved her brother, that's all. She just wanted to do what he did. She's fine now. And what did I think about that? When the police officer at the private school learns I am a lesbian, he wants to know what I eat for dinner. I am young and new to being different in such a public way. Just regular things, I say. Like, what did you have for dinner last night? He challenges. I study the gun at his hip, the cold black fact of it. I am afraid to lie. Salmon frittatas, I say. His hand never leaves the holster. He stands in the doorway and spits on the ground. But it was a special night, I offer. Usually just regular things. When the whole office learns I am a lesbian. Have you ever been to Provincetown? How did you like Brokeback Mountain? Do your parents know? My cousin is gay and lives in West Virginia. Was it hard for you in high school? I want you to know I voted for Al Gore. The Indigo Girls are the best group I ever saw in concert. Really, you don't look it. The Jesus fish on my car is from the previous owner, I promise. I want you to know I voted for John Kerry. My mechanic is gay. I bet he'd give you a good deal on an oil change. Do you play golf? Do you play softball? Do you play tennis? How do you meet people? Is it mostly online? My high school English teacher was gay. She loved Edna St. Vincent Millay. Do you wish you could get married? Do you watch The Ellen Show? Do you love Edna St. Vincent Millay? I want you to know I voted for Barack Obama. When my grandmother learns I am a lesbian, she looks up from her crossword page. Don't be silly, dear. You're Scandinavian. And this one last. When my college roommate learns I am a lesbian. So all those times we watched Felicity together and I asked who would you choose, Ben or Noel, it would have actually been Felicity? Did you even like The English Patient or were you faking it? What about Ani DeFranco? She was attracted to women too, but she married a man. Don't you think that could happen to you? Even Sappho had a husband, I think. What are you going to tell your boyfriend? Does he already know? What am I going to tell my boyfriend? He always thought you were cool. Well, not cool, but in your own way. You had a flair, he said. Was it fun for you, sharing a bathroom with all those girls? Did you even want to dye your hair and paint your nails when the rest of us did? Will I even recognize you the next time I see you? How do you think your diet will change? Are there any long-term health implications? Maybe you should talk to someone, a professional of some kind. Do you worry at all about your soul? Was that ever a source of concern? I just find this all so hard to believe. Were you lying to me then? Or are you lying to me now? How in the world am I ever going to trust you again? And I chose that as the last poem from this book because I think it also gets to the double life and the double bind of some parts of the coming out experience. When you didn't ever intend to lie, but you find that you've been pushed into a story that isn't your story. And then in trying to correct the narrative, that feeling of broken trust between the person who has presumed the thing and the person who is saying, actually, I'm not who you thought I was. I'm not even who I thought I was. And I'm not who any of us were told I was. So that was part of the reason that I wanted to write those experiences in that way. To close the reading part of tonight, which then of course leads into the question and conversation part, I wrote a new poem. It's fairly new. I wrote this for a young woman, very talented poet who had come out at a gathering where I was with a number of other writers, and we were the first people that she had come out to. And I recognized in how nervous she felt, thinking you've known me for a long time and maybe you made assumptions about me and maybe I've made assumptions about me. And I could hear in the tremble in her voice how scared she was to tell us, even those of us who were out people ourselves, that she also was one of us, that she too was a queer person. And so I wrote this poem for her called Out Here. And after I wrote it, I realized, oh, that's not just for her. This is also for anyone who is coming out for the first time, thinking about coming out for the first time, wondering what will happen when they do, or what good things might come from that choice to come out. So I'll read this poem, and then I think Jeff has some questions, and you may have questions too. Thank you for listening. Out here. Out here, the air is clear. The water has gone down under the bridge, the same bridge that once was burning. And you've heard the way they say the daffodils are out now, and other kinds of flowers, by which they mean their green stems have given rise to blossoms, and you are blooming too, the fist of your heart clenched so tight for so long inside you, now slowly unfurling. The air is clear, though you may be breathing heavy, your voice a slim missile of light against the vast dark landscape. You wonder who can even hear you out here, if anyone is even listening. The stars peer back, merely curious, tracing your whereabouts as you once traced theirs. The moon has been accused of phases too, but marvels how they still say constant as the moon. An orbit is not a weakness. A body, heavenly or otherwise, is not a metaphor. Just think of the first time you ever wandered into the woods. Someone told you to hide, so you ran toward the nearest thicket, crouching down, counting silently to yourself in the underbrush, fearing at first the rustle of feet, but later fearing the absence of that rustle. Had they forgotten you after all? Out of sight, out of mind. The air was thick with smoke. Someone had been burning leaves. It was late autumn, and you followed the spice of the wind toward a clearing you had never felt so small as when you stood in the center of the open field, but your lungs swelled. You shouted and heard the out in it. Even then, the way your throat became a bright flower, a tulip, huge and red, opening in the unobstructed light of the wrong season. Ollie, ollie, oxen free. It was a forecast, but you didn't know that then. A rallying cry. You wanted them to find you so much. The daylight broad, the future far away as the riverhead, or the ending of a fairy tale. And when at last they came, they were waving with their mittens on fingers fused into a single woolen spade. You followed when they said there was a fire, a wildfire, they said, and even then you wondered if there was any other kind. Tonight the air is clear, the spring indisputable as dew, the crisp, cool newness of it, which is sometimes called splendor and sometimes called terror. You raise your hand like a flare, you close your eyes and stutter, come out, wherever you are waiting under the new moon, beneath the loom of these impossible trees, but we are coming, I promise. We are rustling our way toward you, murmuring welcome. Some of us rain swept, some of us wind shook, though some of us are closer than you can imagine. Some of us are glowing like fireflies, our small light unmistakable. Some of us are already here. Thank you.
Okay. And am I on?
You're on, Jeff.
I'm on. There I am. Hey, thank you for saving us from our culture for a good 30 minutes. It's lovely as always. You read so beautifully. And we've had conversations in the past. We're going to get to that. I do just want, while we are on the subject of your books, is how people can buy them and where's the best place to order your books and learn more about you.
Oh, okay, excellent. So as you all know, it's always lovely to support your local indie bookstore, most especially now, of course. And we have a wonderful South Florida indie bookstore, Books and Books. And I'm very lucky to have read there in person in the past. So actually, Yvette just put up the link. If you are interested in ordering these books or any of my books, Books and Books has them, and they have them in the Coral Gables store for in-person pickup, but they do virtual orders as well. And we love to support them in any way we can. The other perk is that if you do order my book, or really anyone affiliated with FIU's book from Books and Books, there's a very good chance you'll get a signed copy because they ask us to sign a bunch of overstock when we're there. So thanks Yvette for putting that link in. I would love it if you support Books and Books. You can always, of course, support a bookstore that's near and dear to your own heart.
Very good. Thank you, Julie. And then Julie's website is juliemariewade.com. And you can visit there. So we welcome questions, comments as we go along, and we've been getting some so far. Let's start with Brian Feller right away. What do you think the biggest challenge when writing about sexuality and identity?
That's a good question. Hi, Brian. I know Brian. He's up in Massachusetts, I believe. I think for me, one of the challenges is everyone is so many things, right? And so there's this feeling of, I know that if you are a writer that has any other adjective that comes before your name ever, if you're a woman writer, if you're a writer of color, I mean, that's after your name, but you get the idea, or a gay writer, or a trans writer, that you may feel sometimes very empowered by that, and other times you may feel, am I only allowed to talk about this part of myself? I think all of those feelings come up in writing, like how can I possibly be all that I am all the time on the page? And I tend to find that how I mitigate that challenge of course, not wanting to hide myself, but also not wanting to limit myself in what I write, is to constantly experiment with forms and to constantly experiment with genres. And I tell my students a lot too that this month's portfolio in a class doesn't really have to look at all like next month's portfolio in a class. Presumably you are growing as a person and a writer in between all of our deadlines. And that's true even if you're the person making your own deadlines as a writer. So I think sometimes it can be really valuable to say, for right now, this is what I'm working on. You can have a project book like When I Was Straight, where that was the clear focus. I knew I wanted a set of poems that all had the same name. I knew I wanted to have a set of poems that were about coming out. But the next project that I wrote after that was completely different because I wanted to focus on something else. And so moving between poetry and prose, but also different kinds of poetry and different kinds of prose, it can not only help you feel like you're not pigeonholing yourself, but it can also, because we write to discover what we want to say as much as we write to say what we know we want to say, I think mixing up the forms helps you figure out things. And sometimes it helps you figure out questions about sexuality, about identity, but really about anything that you might not have even realized that you have. So I give a little shout out to E.M. Forster on most of my syllabi. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? And a lot of writing for me is figuring out what I think by writing and then going back and shaping and figuring out the best form to contain that content.
All righty. I've got a whole bunch of questions, but I love what we're getting from Lauren. Do you feel like the act of writing, reading your writing and being read is another form of coming out? Or is it a way of, and people can read in the chat, of subverting that correction? Does it carry the same uneasiness, or does it cancel that uneasiness for you? So how does writing process your coming out experience?
I know Lauren as well. Hi, Lauren. That's a really good question too. I think initially writing always feels like it's private, right? I mean, sometimes at the very beginning of our writing lives, we may not have even thought about an author life, like the public life of the writer. So there's a freedom to say anything and to almost kind of like rehearse in writing for the encounters, including like coming out encounters that happen, to practice it all and to work it out. And even in writing, there's a chance to say, all right, I was completely speechless when that happened. I didn't know how to react, but now I can go back and write what happened and I get a new power over that experience. So writing has all of these like superpowers to it, both before the in-person interaction and in the aftermath of in-person interactions. At least for me, it does. But I think I feel easier about writing because in real life, when a particular kind of coming out moment arises, I mean, sometimes it's very easy and simple, and other times you know it's going to be complicated based on the circumstances. I always think like, wait, if only I just had my book with me and it was socially appropriate to just start reading, the script is already there if you've already written it. And so in a way, like this is so much easier than something that could just happen, at the grocery store or at the YMCA. Like it's so much easier when you have already had a chance to work on what you want to say. And you've had a chance to shape it in a way with an audience in mind. So I think that it makes me far less uneasy because also you can invite people to an event and say, this is kind of what we're doing here. And so you're giving them an invitation. You're making them co-correctors with you.
Okay. So before you came out, which was around what age, 22-ish or so,
Yeah.
what trajectory did you imagine for yourself as a writer when you were back when you were straight? And what in the coming out moment and that sort of that drama of it, what happened to you as a writer and sort of got you here?
That's also a really good question. I think so. I met my partner the first year of graduate school, and the first year we were friends. We weren't together yet, but I was kind of having this confluence of all my great loves. Like I was meeting Angie. I was discovering that school was going to be indispensable. I was going to have to stay in school forever, and I was also starting to teach for the first time as a graduate teaching fellow. So I was also discovering like, oh, this is a way that I can stay in school forever because I'm going to love this. I'm going to want to do this always. And I already knew that I loved writing because that's why I had come to that master's program. So there was a sense of like this alignment that happened. And in retrospect, of course, it's sweeter because you're not in the fray, the difficulties of, given the family that I come from and given the church that I come from, there was no way that I could come out to them and have it be met with understanding or acceptance. And I knew that. So, but in retrospect, when you take that out of the equation, you see like, oh, this was just meant to be. This was exactly the course. And I still think it was meant to be. It's just, you can look back at it without always having to wrangle with how it actually was to get that alignment firmly in place. But the writing that I had come to do, the only kind of writing I really knew I could do at that time was I was very interested in confessional poetry, probably poetry that looked like a poem on the page, left aligned. I was very interested in fierce feminist poets who are still precious to me, people like Sandra Cisneros, Sharon Olds, Julia Alvarez. Those were poets I had been reading my senior year of college. And they were heterosexual women who wrote very honestly and directly about romantic love and, their female identity as well. And so I thought I was going to write a book that would be fierce feminist confessional love poems. But I soon began to see that the book that I was going to write was also going to be lesbian love poems. And what was complicated was that you realize I had a really supportive community, the best place to have been coming out at that time with peers and faculty mentors. But in the larger sense, realizing that writing a series of love poems as a woman to or for a man versus as a woman to or for a woman, that they were going to be received differently. I think there was a bit of naivete at the beginning where I just thought, but everybody loves a love poem. And then eventually I realized that that wasn't a bad thing, that my poetry was always going to have that stamp on it, but it was more that probably everyone's read a love poem, but they might, if they're reading my poem, it might be the first lesbian love poem that they're reading. So I could start to kind of see that as having a connection to my teaching, which when I got the fellowship to come and go to school and also teach, it was odd to me because people still always talk about how do you balance writing and teaching. And I didn't realize how yoked they were going to be or how much of teaching is deeply connected with what you're writing and how much of what you're writing is deeply connected with what you're teaching. So realizing that there would maybe be an educational aspect to my writing, that's not something that I had even considered before. And then over time, kind of as what I said to Brian, I found that I wanted all the forms and all the genres and access to every way to write, because I think that's also part of being able to say, gay is an inextricable part of who I am, and yet it's not the only aspect of who I am. So I want the full, I want the smorgasbord. I want all the possibilities for how I can write typically self-referential work I like, but how I can write in any imaginable way. I want to have all the tools.
So, but writing, and we'll get to the next question. We have some others here, but I just want to follow up on that process of writing a love poem. And what I love about your work, and I think any great work, is honest. And it comes from a place that you can back up and you can explain, and you're not faking it. So it sounds to me that in the process of, I'm going to sort of declare myself as a writer, who am I really? And the writing actually became the sort of the drawing of the curtain.
It did. I mean, that's completely fair. And, you know, it's funny. I hope that sometimes I'm this figure in the life of some of my own students, but there was a professor in the program who I only knew as an out gay woman. But I remember her saying to me, she was on my committee and reading my book. And I remember her saying to me that she came out when she was in graduate school and that she had written love poems to a previous boyfriend. And when she realized that she was gay, she just changed all the pronouns to feminine pronouns. And she said those poems were not authentic because they weren't written about the life I was living my way into. They were like trying to go back and correct the work of the past. So she gave me this really good advice, even though I hadn't started to publish or even really imagined sending work out at that time, that you didn't have to go back and like correct the work that you'd been writing for years and years that was already in that when I was straight, because there's no other choice. I have to be straight. That kind of writing. It was more like, let your writing show your journey. And that's really good advice because I often am still, you know, as you can see, still reckoning with a lot of the same questions that came up then. But now I have like new ways of reckoning and new and more experience than I had then too. So it allows the work to diverge, but I don't then have to go back and say like, back then, like I used to be more uneasy with the word lesbian. I didn't like it as well. Now I'm more comfortable with it. I always have liked gay, but that evolves over time, and her advice stays with me. You don't have to change it. You can let your work be the living record of your life.
So we're going to get to lead to Zach's question, and I'll do it through this way. And you write about at your website that you write at places of intersections, which for you is moving basically across sexual identity lines. But and that line is sort of a presumed or assumed heterosexuality that we are raised with versus the same-sex attraction that is pulling in ways that cannot be ignored. So what we find is that now as our culture evolves, is that that intersection of those lines is really a moving target, and that maybe the language you may have used when you were starting is new language now, or different language now. And I think Zach and I are kind of on the same question there, which is, so where does that, as you map ahead, you know, your future writing projects, or think about where you are going as a writer and writing about yourself in this context, where do you see that going over the next few years? We do see things are changing, and those hard lines, those diametrics are not so firm as they once were.
I think those are really good questions. Hi, Zach. And I love this phrase, your poetic relationship with the future. That's very poetic, and I certainly imagine that I have one. I always imagine that there is more to be written than I will ever get to write. But I think maybe, you know, you go through phases in your writing life that also parallel, you know, your comfort with beginning to name who you are. And I think there was a time when I felt like if I wasn't explicitly writing about my sexuality in an individual poem, a lyric essay, a project, if that wasn't the overt focus, then I was failing all of the other, you know, the queer people out there, the potential readers. And then other times I would scold myself for feeling that way. And I would think like, no, but it's always, it's your life. It's your life to draw from. It's a gay life. That doesn't have to be always the focus. There has to be something about being able to follow what's calling you. And so I think over time, I've gotten more comfortable honoring that and knowing that it's the self is there in all kinds of ways, but sometimes we're pivoting more toward some aspect of experience. Obviously, right now, I've been thinking a lot about the pandemic. I've been writing a lot about the pandemic. And it's funny to me to think that probably even like 10 years ago, if I were writing about the pandemic, there would be a voice in my head that would say like, what is my social responsibility to acknowledge being gay in the pandemic? And now I feel a greater freedom to say like, it's all there. It's all part of me. I'm going to go where this leads me. I think my poetic relationship with the future, also something that I didn't imagine that's part of like living your way into the future, is that I never imagined I would be a collaborator. I was so used to thinking of writing as a solitary activity, which in a lot of ways, I mean, you're often alone when you are writing. But that feeling of initially writing was a way even to be my alibi at the camp, like so that, maybe the counselor would come and ask me what I was working on. It was a way of having this either secret place to hopefully no one would see it and it would be mine, or would be a way to interact with other people, especially adults who, seem to be happy if you were reading or writing something. But then over time, actually because of coming to South Florida, and because of meeting Denise Duhamel, Maureen Seaton, master collaborators, that whole possibility came into my life, and it changed the way that I think about writing and writing with someone, writing back and forth with someone. That's now going to be a part of my life. I think going forward, it's less lonely, and it's more. It's also more trusting, and I'm probably more trusting and less guarded than I was 20 years ago. That you can trust your collaborator and let them send you lines. So Denise and I are finishing a huge volume of prose about the first 3 months of the pandemic, and we're getting into more collaborative poems. So just like having not just every tool you can use as a writer, but also realizing, I can write with other people, and that also changes how I come to the page. I might end up writing a line I would have never written had Denise not sent me that line, or Brenda Miller, my first lyric essay professor, writing with me and giving me a line and having it take me to a new place. So in all kinds of ways, I'm a more open writer, and I'm less afraid of getting it wrong and more open to making it new.
Okay. Ronnie Jun, I hope I got that correctly. You may have a better pronunciation for me. I'm sorry if I mangled that. And it is a question I think anybody who writes, you face, and that is what you're willing to share, how far you're willing to go. And I think you didn't read it tonight, but When I Was Straight, when you write about when my mother learns I'm a lesbian, and that's been a theme for you, I think, and working out that acceptance or lack thereof, that has been a mark for in your life. And I hope someday that gets corrected for you, however you experience that. But where are the limits, I guess, and what's important for you to share so that the reader understands that you're being honest, that you are taking them someplace where they wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to go, but also going in a way that feels safe to you.
Okay, that's great. The poem that Jeff is referencing, When My Mother Learns I'm a Lesbian, it's a little bit longer than some, and it's a little bit more narrative. And it's funny that you mentioned it because it's the only poem. This whole project was written when I moved to Florida, sort of from a distance, and that's the only poem that actually appeared in my first poetry book project, which I didn't publish, Ron. I didn't feel that my master's thesis poetry collection was ready for the world. Not because in any way of its lesbian love poem contents. Many of the individual poems I did publish in literary journals, but I didn't feel the book as a whole was as sophisticated, as ready. And so I didn't submit it as a book to be published. But that poem, When My Mother Learns I'm a Lesbian, actually appears in that thesis as my mother, on learning I love a woman. And so I changed it to fit the pattern of this book. But that was the first time that I had ever, in writing that wasn't, in a diary that had a little lock, reckoned with my mother and the absolute unacceptance that I knew was going to be there when I did tell her. And so the poem is somewhat of a poetic, but still a transcript of that phone call when I told her. And I think I've kind of Ron's question about, is there anything that you wouldn't publish? Yes, but usually it's more because I feel like there's some sort of standard I have for myself in terms of, is this polished enough? Is this world ready enough? Does this take into account enough the audience? Or is this still in the mode where it's only really for me? Because I think we have to write for ourselves if we write, but then there has to be some sort of transposition that happens that polishes and sharpens and makes it ready for an audience. And so there are some pieces that don't get there for me, where I think that was the exercise I needed to go on and write the next piece that can get there. So I have things that I wouldn't publish, but it's more because they don't meet my own aesthetic standards. They're more the training, they're the etudes to get me ready for the real performance piece. But in terms of what I've written, about family, lack of acceptance, I've kind of come to see that as another part of, this conversation about coming out. Like, it's really important to celebrate the empowering aspects of naming yourself, but there is this other side of still acknowledging why we have to do it at all, or the challenges that arise. It's not as if that empowerment comes without any strings attached. And in kind of the same way, I've come to see that it's okay in the end for me if there isn't perfect resolution with my family. I think it's actually really good because I'm seeing a lot of progress. Jeff, you sort of mentioned representation earlier. I'm seeing a lot of progress, in TV shows and movies where there are more out characters, gay characters, bisexual characters, trans characters. Like, we're seeing more representation of the LGBT, but I often find that the plot points always come back to, at some point, the family just accepts the child. It could be a humorous journey. It could be a very painful, depending, is this a comedy? Is this a drama? What is the subject genre of the piece? But that it always has to culminate in our popular arts in some way, in the family makes peace with it, or there's some kind of agree to disagree, but we still gather at family gatherings. And that's really hard for me. I don't really know how you agree to disagree about who someone is and who they live their life with, or how you navigate that space. But I also think I can be a person who speaks to and writes about that there is a whole life after estrangement from a biological family that can still be rich and full, and that there's another family on the other side of that. So I kind of think that's a narrative that maybe doesn't get told as often, that there's a happy ending, but sometimes it's not the ending you would have chosen, but there's still a happy ending on the other side of it. So that's the story, I guess, that I'm trying to tell because it's mine.
So we'll do one more question, or one more little spot. And I think that brings us a little bit around to what we tried to do with Open Dialogues, which was really to show that going through that sort of threshold of the fear or the bravery it takes, and then when you do get to the other side, that the the feeling of self-empowerment is so amazing that you now feel capable of doing most anything that you set your heart and mind to. So what I wanted to mention, though, and when we were doing Open Dialogues, is that when I read When I Was Straight, I was looking for the tone. I formed the questions and I did the interviews off camera, but I was really looking for tone. And what I really took from your work was your ability to tell a very hard truth and also have a sense of humor about it. And so that informed, in making a film, sort of a likeness of tone and approach that I think we were able to hit that balance. Can you talk about what art forms for you, whether it's art exhibitions or music or popular culture? I know you're a Mary Tyler Moore fan. What do you see outside of your sphere of writing and educating as a professor at FIU? What kind of do you sort of appropriate from other art forms?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I actually talk to my students about this a fair amount, that especially within creative nonfiction, though I think this is true within every genre, but creative nonfiction, there are so many possibilities. Like, we talk about adopted forms and how we, and better known actually as hermit crab essays, where you adopt the shell of something out there in the culture. And it doesn't even have to be, in fact, it often isn't, an artistic form. So you might have a montage essay or a collage essay that is borrowing that kind of work that a visual artist would do. And you're arranging your images on the page, your salient details on the page, more the way that a visual artist might put together a collage, or a filmmaker might put together a montage. more associative way of writing. And that, I mean, that rings all of my chimes. I'm very excited by those kinds of not strictly linear, but often recursive movements. I'm interested in like lyric essays that use like the mosaic approach of kind of like when you see a work of art that has many different, it's multimedia, right? Or like a classic mosaic that has, you know, bits of shell, bits of rock, bits of feather, bits of stone, that all come together and they don't lose their unique particles, but they make a new thing. So on the one hand, we're always in essay classes, and then by extension, because my teaching and my writing turned out to be so connected, borrowing those kinds of forms that aren't strictly a narrative that goes from a beginning to an end. And it's hard when you're a creative nonfiction writer because your end thankfully hasn't happened yet. So like being able to be recursive in the way that a mosaic might be or a collage might be, that's a really useful form anyway. But the other side of hermit crabs, and shout out to my mentors and teachers, Brenda Miller and Suzanne Paola, who coined that term to help us think about the little hermit crabs going along, needing to find their shells. I mean, I think as writers, we all need to find shells, especially for our most vulnerable content, like the little hermit crab that's about to get burned by the sun and needs that shell for protection. So I love to teach, and I'm more and more loving to write adopted forms work where you're donning the shell of something that you don't traditionally think of as literary. For me, actually in Just an Ordinary Woman Breathing, it's using inductive proofs from geometry near the end of the book, which I was terrible at geometry, but I love that the proofs, the inductive ones, not the deductive ones in the T-chart, but the inductive ones, they look like prose poems. And if you put them together, they kind of look like essays. So that you can borrow something from math, or you can borrow, my new project has a lot to do with music, and I'm researching the life of John Cage, and I share a birthday with him, not the same year, of course, but a feeling of connection with like really experimental artists like John Cage, who, if you don't know John Cage, please look him up, but is especially famous for 4:33, the performance of 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. So I get really excited to use like, what are musicians doing, especially Cage and some of his really wild innovations with music. What are other people doing, and how can I use that in creative writing? And then how can I show that to my students? So all of that is really connected for me. But usually I tell my students what I would tell myself, which is everything you encounter, even something that someone says, well, that's not high art. That's, you know, that's just pointless. That doesn't have any value. No. There's so much you can open up in a piece of writing, even about, you know, just a kind of silly blockbuster movie. It's showing you something about the culture, and you might be able to use that in your writing.
I love that John Cage reference, because it's the one piece of music we can all play.
That's right. Everyone is equally a participant.
Exactly. So the piece is, he will come out, sit at a piano and sit for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And the music, this is the most dramatic moment you'll ever have in learning to listen to music. You're listening to the sound in the room. And that's what Cage is teaching you. And when you learn to listen like that, now you're hearing and processing information in a completely different way. The way you walk is a rhythm. The way you know, the way your wheels turn on the road, all these things are rhythms. And Cage teaches you that nature, the sounds we live in are the music that we inhabit. So that's
exactly right. I didn't even know that you were a fellow Cage enthusiast, Jeff.
I had a teacher at Broward Community College way back. I walked into his an art appreciation class the first day, and he was playing Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians. And you're going, if you've ever heard that, and it's just this repetition of sounds, and it's like, okay, I've never heard this before. And he was basically saying, you're entering a space that you have never been to previously. And he introduced us to John Cage and Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan and all these people, Robert Rauschenberg, Rosenquist, all of this stuff that was not your traditional art history, art appreciation thing. And he was the most radical teacher I ever had. I asked him a question one day, very dutiful student, asked him a question, and he gave me the best answer I've ever given. He said, look it up. And he taught me, if you want to learn, take ownership of your learning. So
absolutely.
So the John Cage piece was that. Yeah. So I think we've had a really wonderful experience here with you. Thank you. And just one Books and Books to get Julie's books. If we want to, it's in the chat space. If we want to repost that. And I do want to share with everybody that Open Dialogue Stories from the LGBTQ Community, of which Julie is a very, very big part of, will be screened through October 25th at the Art and Culture Center of Hollywood with 2 other exhibitions. And Yvette, if you could post the trailer page, the page for Open Dialogues, in which the trailer is there, and then everybody can go and see. It's about a 2-minute trailer, maybe a minute and a half. And also, if you can't make it to the center, Open Dialogues is an official selection for the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival, which will be scheduled and screened November 5th to the 22nd. It'll be a virtual festival, so I think it's geo-locked to Florida, but we'll find out when we have the information. We will share that. So as I said to Julie earlier, this is normally where we would meet for cocktails and finger foods at a cafe somewhere, but unfortunately, we have the reality of having to kind of hit our leave button and say goodbye. But thank you to everyone who joined us today, and the really great informed questions. And some of you I know are outside of our South Florida sphere. So thank you for making the virtual journey to the Art and Culture Center and being part of this experience with this really wonderful artist.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for everyone I don't know who's here and everyone whose name I recognize. So this was lovely, and it's being recorded, so you can also share it later if you know someone who wanted to be here but couldn't.
Right, we will post it on our webpage, and so that will be available. So thank you all again, and thank you, Julie. That was very special, and I'm glad you walked into the Art and Culture Center about a year or so ago. And you came with Denise Duhamel. And I knew Denise, but I didn't know you, and now I know both of you, and my life is richer for it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Happy Saturday, everyone. Stay safe.
Yes.
Bye-bye.